The Elektron Syntakt has both harsh digital engines and smooth analog ones. And it got me wondering, is this the cyberpunk synth of the future? And is this a question that makes any sense? I have no idea, but just roll with it. After all, it's Halloween. What's up, and welcome back to Gabe Miller Music. Today I'm walking you through a couple of beats on the Elektron Syntakt, which I've had for a while, and this is like a partial review, but mostly just a like, hey, check out the cool things that I figured out how to do on it, and here are the things that might not be for you if you're in the market for a pricey Groovebox. All that being said, let's just jump into it. All right, so here's how the beat that you heard in the intro sounds without processing, because I did record these tracks into my DAW and mix them in post, and in the box, it does sound a little more cluttered. There's a lot going on, so let's dive into each individual element a little more isolated. Let's start with the analog tracks, because this was something I was definitely excited about. Here's my kick with the BD hard engine, and I just freaking love the kick engines. That was the case with the model cycles with the single kick engine. I freaking love the multiple kick engines that we get on the Syntakt, both digital and analog. They sound freaking great. And we have a lot of options for how to shape them. I've got this one like overdriven. I've got snap turned up quite a bit, which emphasizes the transient. Fairly simple wave, your hold amount, that's all controllable. This thing is basically a sample pack generator. That was the case with the model cycles. And by the way, I've got a dedicated video about the model cycles and what still makes it unique on the way. So be sure to subscribe if you don't want to miss it. I will also briefly compare it to the Syntakt in that video. So once again, stay tuned for that. But this thing is basically a sample pack generator, especially for its kick engines. And you're going to see some more kick action in the second beat of today's video. Next up, the snare. Now, the snare is decent, but it's still a little bit weak. I found it's better with sharper snares. Once again, stay tuned until the second beat in this video. Punchier snares it does decently. It's definitely very analog sounding, which is a bug or a feature depending on what you're after. For this track, it is like close to what I needed, but it's like lacking a bit of power. But for some more kind of like down tempo or old school style stuff, this does sound really nice. Like objectively, it does sound good. It's just not fit for every purpose. You've got control over things like balance, detune, snap. I've got it overdriven heavily, and you can hear I've got a bit of filter envelope movement on here to make it a little more defined and punchy, which is pretty neat. Now, this is the star of the show. So let me show you what this sounds like not sent through the effects. Because if you go into amp, you can choose whether or not it goes through the effects. And also, if you hit function and then effects, it'll take you to all the effects routing. And you'll notice this is the only thing sent to effects. Because this is like a cumulative distortion. And so if you send a bunch of stuff through this and like crank it, you're going to get a mess very quickly. So I chose to make this the only track that gets to get distorted to hell and back, and I think that sounds quite neat. So let me play this with just the kick. Also, fun fact, the effects give you a like pseudo way to fake some sidechain. If I go into the actual effects themselves and go to amp, I can control this, and if I hit record, I can set the steps of the effects sequencer, turn up the depth, you'll notice it's not touching the dry signal, which you can also still hear, but the wet signal is getting pumped pretty nicely. I'm going to back off on that for now, though. Regardless, you will see if I go into the synth button while effects is triggered here, I've got drive just cranked as far as it'll go. And it dirties up the sound really nicely. It takes it from like acid techno to some proper cyberpunk dirt. And that's basically what this sound is, by the way. It's the dual VCO synth engine. This is the configuration. Oh, you can see overdrive is already cranked. So I've got overdrive going into the distortion with just a filter sweep with the resonance cranked. So we turn up the overdrive, and that still wasn't getting the cyberpunk vibe for me. So then we go into the effects, distort it, and layered with that, one of the digital engines. In this case, I'm having it function more as a sub. And this is the synth engine Bits, which, despite its name making it sound like it's going to be used specifically for chiptune stuff, I actually find myself using it all the time. It's kind of my go-to subtractive engine in digital form because, you know, you use up your dual VCO stuff real quick. So this is just a pretty standard saw wave, overdriven, also to get extra volume, to be honest, and then high cut filter in a pluck formation. Pretty simple. I also do want to mention that this does sound quite nice if I put it through the effects before. And if I unmute our acid bass, that's where that kind of falls apart because they're just fighting it out way too much. Versus, that works much better for this specific purpose. I also, in addition to this, have another instance of Bits. This time, doing a much longer filter sweep with the resonance turned up. You're probably starting to see a bit of a trend here. This is how a lot of these sounds are made. It just be like that, doing this pretty classic synth wavy sweep. Like just a pretty simple saw. Let me show you what this sounds like. You hear that lovely little bit of bit crushing? That really works for this sound, I think. On top of that, this is what I initially imagined the use of bits would be for these kind of like chiptune sounds. In this case, I'm using it as like this driving percussive element. And I brought in those chords. Let's take a look at those next. There's not like a ton going on here because this is a really dense mix and I didn't want to overload it with like harmonic content. But this is the Chord engine, which is very similar to the one on the model cycles. And unlike the model cycles, I can do a filter sweep on it. So of course I did. And it sounds adequate. I should mention that you can tweak all of these chord types. It'll list them out. You can affect the balance with these cute little animations. You can affect the punch. So if you're doing kind of stabbier chords, that might come in handy. And of course, you can overdrive them, tune them up and down, change the wave, modulate the wave with the LFOs. We haven't even gotten to LFOs yet. In fact, now that I say that, let's do some LFO stuff. This is a self-made preset. Pretty much all of these sounds I designed from scratch because, like, that's the reason I bought this thing. Like, if I wanted to use pre-made sounds with this kind of workflow, I'd use a Digitact. But this speaks to me much more because I like using the Elektron style boxes to shape sounds. So to make stuff from scratch with all these filter sweeps and all these different engines, that's the reason I got it. And you'll notice I'm kind of sticking to a few specific synth and drum engines. I'm not going to be using all of them. But what it does quite well. And that's kind of what I mean by it being like the synth of the future, where it can be a drum machine or sort of the only mono synth you'll ever need, and like an FM digital synth all like on top of each other. Now, if I was to actually say what I think the synth of the future is, I think it's the Mini Freak, but I came up with this video idea before the Mini Freak was announced and I didn't know about it, so do with that what you will. Regardless, in this case, I've got the LFO sent to the pan, and this is actually the basic FM tone. And it's not all that FM-y, really. Like if I get this filter up, it's a little metallic, but it's still fairly standard sounding. And you'll notice this little lag in the attack, which it really suits this sound, and it just floats on the top of everything. The clap engine is excellent. I don't really have much more to say about it than that. Other than that, I've sent it to a whole lot of reverb. I've turned the balance so that it's less on the tone. And it's excellent. Once again, this thing is a freaking sample pack generator. Very basic cymbal. Nothing to write home about. One more instance of bits. In this case, I've got a couple of LFOs going, and you can hear the filter like warble. Which is fun. That functions as the lead that floats over the top of the track, by the way. So let me just solo. So we got that going for us. And then I'm using my last analog track with just a simple little analog hi-hat. So that's the main beat I wanted to walk you through. That's the one that you heard in the intro. That's the whole inspiration for this cyberpunk theming here. Let's quickly jump into a second beat, which is not really all that cyberpunk, but definitely pretty modern for kind of the synth head crowd. Let's do some drift phonk. So this is like comically edgy in its own special way. And this, I think, shows off kind of the other like side of the coin of this thing's sound. So we're using the digital drums, this time leaning very heavily on them, with this absolute chungus of a kick. Overdriven quite heavily. Once again, I'm doing the whole overdrive into distortion thing. So here it is without distortion. Like, it's good, but with, now that is disgusting. Once again, you will notice that's the only thing I'm sending to the distortion, because anything else would just get like chewed up and spit out by that bass, and not necessarily in a pleasant sounding way. But like, that goes hard. It's kind of going for like almost like a hyper pop snare here. It's very metallic and once again, very overdriven. The punch knob goes a long way, I've noticed. Tuning stuff like this higher is also helpful. And I should also mention that beyond like analog sounding snares and metallic snares, this thing does kind of 808 style snares really well. This is kind of a dinky example, but this is what I'm using in this track. Once again, this is one of the analog tracks. You can tell because of the way that it is. And in this case, I've actually layered this snare and this snare together and then used this as like an extra bit of percussion. Once again, the excellent clap engine. This time a little more restrained and a little more in your face because it's a more central element of the tune. I'm mostly using the digital engines here, so I've kind of got room to waste my analog engines for this little track. So I'm just using this as a little acrostic, which is kind of fun. And while we're on the topic of percussive analog elements, let's talk about the final one. That cowbell. It's freaking perfect for this style of music. Like, it is the cowbell. There's like no control over it, and I don't need much control over it because it's the freaking cowbell. And that's just freaking great. Like, you've basically got your track right there. That's all you need. And I should mention, I have some step automation for the part at the end that kind of meanders a little bit. So I've automated it to send it more to the reverb and ping pong delay. Up next, an offbeat hi-hat. And this very simple hi-hat with some note rolls that I have programmed in. So let me just play this with like the clap and the snare. And I have a bit of LFO going on once again to send this to the pan. It's just subtly moving back and forth in your headphones, which sounds especially nice on the rolls. And then a couple of extra little elements, this synth bits sound, which is another kind of bit crushed sounding, mild filter sweep background element. So let me show you that in context. And because at this point I've like fulfilled the purpose of this beat, I had some tracks to waste. So I made this little bits thing with some ridiculous LFOs just as a little fill element. And that is it for today's video, but if you'd like some more Halloween spooks, I did a video on my second channel where I made music out of ghost hunting equipment. If you'd like to watch that, it's up over here. And for more Syntakt, you can check this video out down over here. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll be back with a new video in a little bit.